Welcome back to this international relations discussions that I have with Surya, who is a law student and almost about to graduate now. This time, I believe the topic is quite obvious for all of us. It's about what is happening between US, China, and Taiwan. The Speaker of House of Representatives from USA visited Taiwan even after multiple rounds of deliberation, and Chinese personnel saying to not visit, and they'll be considering as a significant interference in their own domestic politics and domestic relations. So multiple things have been unfolding on the global crisis, and it seems that this is going to stay for a long time and might as well have much higher repercussions than ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis as well. So I think it's imperative, first of all, to understand this crisis. And for that, we believe history is the best way to start off. So I welcome Surya on this podcast once again. So Surya, let's start by the history. I think there are two major points of contention here, something called as PRC and ROC, People's Republic of China and Republic of China. And I think this entire issue stems from that very perspective. So why don't you take us back into the history and how did this formation happen in the first place?
Very briefly, the Chinese Civil War is very complicated, but very briefly put, in 1911, the Qing dynasty was deposed by the nationalist government, the KMT that is, and they ruled over what is now the China that we know, the Shanghai, Beijing, and all that. Mao Zedong, at that time, Mao Zedong, he was a communist leader who started a guerrilla movement in the mountains in the 1920s. So he formed the People's Liberation Army in 1927 to fight the KMT. That's the nationalists, Chinese nationalists. But what happened? There was a break because starting with in the mid 1930s, the Japanese invaded northern China, what we know as Manchuria, bordering with Korea. They first occupied Korea, then they occupied northern China, using a pretext, of course, saying the Chinese fired at us, so we are taking over. So they occupied what is now Beijing, Shanghai, all of these cities, and they occupied the city of Nanjing, which was the capital of China at the time. And the atrocities in these cities were so unimaginable that even the Nazis said, okay, these guys are a little too crazy. I think we shouldn't be that bad. And if the Nazis are saying that, then that's a bit of a problem. So the occupation included the island of Taiwan as we know it today. They occupied Taiwan as well. So about 8 years later, the World War ended with the atomic bombing of Japan, and the civil war between the nationalists and the communists. The two sides actually stopped the civil war and joined forces to fight the Japanese, and did serious damage to the war effort of the Japanese. Of course, and after the Second World War, Japan surrendered. Now, after that, the Chinese Civil War resumed. And then what happened was the Communist Party won. The Communists under Mao Zedong and the People's Liberation Army beat the Nationalists. And the Nationalists were Chiang Kai-shek, basically. He was the leader. He was no Democrat. He was a tyrant himself, just like Mao. So he, along with about 1.5 million anti-communists, fled to what is now Taiwan. So at 1940, in 1949, when the People's Republic of China was formed, that is what we currently know as China, the Shanghai, Beijing, all of that. A few small islands near the Chinese coast were occupied by the Republic of China. So both the nationalists and the People's Republic claimed to be the legitimate Chinese government. Right? So the nationalists became called the Republic of China, and the communists called themselves the People's Republic of China. So Mao took some time to gain control over the entire land that's currently what is Xinjiang in Tibet. He did not have control over it, so it took him some time. But basically, the entire what we know as China today came under control of Mao Zedong, and the nationalists were supported by the US at the time because the Cold War had started. The Truman Doctrine had been announced, basically looking to slow the spread of communism and reverse it. So any dictator, doesn't matter who he is, was backed by the US as long as they would fight the communists. So yeah, that is very very briefly how the People's Republic and Republic of China came to be formed.
Got it. Got it. I think this helped because I think this was the major split because of which the entire issue started off, first of all. I think coming on to this time frame as we are currently after the Second World War, something called as Sino Soviet Split happened, where even though both of them were communist countries, but after Stalin's death, there were contentions that, Russia may not be the true communist country as China wanted it to be. And then,
Right.
further disparities started coming up between them. And thus, China's policy towards other countries also changed a lot. So, any comments on that side?
So about the Sino-Soviet split, it was a very very important event during the Cold War, which does not get its fair share of attention. Because when we think of it, we think of the Cold War as a fight between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So what happened was in 1953, Stalin died, and he was replaced by somebody called Nikita Khrushchev. Now Mao Zedong saw himself as an ideologue and a leader with the same status as, say, Lenin, Marx, and Stalin, the great communist leaders. And he felt that the current leadership, that's Nikita Khrushchev, who undertook a campaign called de-Stalinization after he came to power, he felt that Khrushchev betrayed the communist ideology, and he was not a full uh, dyed in the wool communist the way Mao was. So he thought that alliance with someone who's fraud basically is not ideal, and we will pursue our own foreign policy. Now, this is where it gets interesting because about 9 years later, this happened around 63, the Soviet split, the Sino-Soviet split. About 9 years after that, 8 years after that, the Indo-Pak War of 1971, as everybody, we all know too well, happened, where America supported Pakistan over India. The reason for this was that the Americans under Nixon were negotiating a deal with the People's Republic of China to see if they can join the fight against the Soviets in the Cold War, right? So the thing is, at that time, one small little thing that people should know is that the People's Republic of China was not recognized by the UN at the time. From 1945 to 1971, the Republic of China, that is Taiwan, was recognized as the official China, and the People's Republic did not have any recognition. I know it seems kind of odd because China is so large and Republic of China is so small. So how? But basically, this was changed in 1971. A secret visit by Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State of the US at the time, that's equivalent to our foreign minister, visited Zhou Enlai. He was the foreign minister of China at the time. He negotiated a recognition by the US of the People's Republic. Following which, a year later, Nixon visited China in February 1972, and the People's Republic of China was recognized, and the Republic of China was no longer recognized by the UN. So the thing is, from then, China sees, in fact, even from 1949, the People's Republic of China has always seen Taiwan as a breakaway province, which they will control either through diplomacy or through force, right? And because of this, Mao tried something called he tried to basically attack them and occupy them, but it failed. So this is known as the Taiwan Strait Crisis. So the strait between, I mean, as the name suggests, is between China and Taiwan. So he tried to invade Taiwan twice when he was premier. It didn't work. It failed miserably. In fact, at that time, the US even came to aid Taiwan. They didn't shoot at the People's Republic, but they still put the US Navy between Taiwan and China, and obviously there was no way the Chinese Navy could match up to the US Navy at the time. And even though they had just finished a shooting war between each other in Korea, as you know, between 1950 and 1953, the North Korea and the South Korea was formed. Even then, they didn't really shoot at each other in the Taiwan Strait. And then after that, Mao decided not to try again. He tried multiple small efforts, but none of them succeeded. And then he died in 1976. So his successor, Deng Xiaoping, who is seen by many as probably the greatest Chinese leader in modern history, he began this policy of not doing it by violence but through negotiation. As you know, the one China policy, the one government, one country, two systems, which they have with Hong Kong and Macau, is what he proposed for Taiwan as well. It did happen, and then Deng Xiaoping also passed away, and his successor was somebody called Jiang Zemin, who took power in 1991, just after the Tiananmen Square massacre. So then what happened was the US speaker, again at the time, I forget his name, he visited the island of Taiwan. And this is seen by China as a red line, like how we have a red line for Kashmir. Internal politics maybe. China has a red line for Taiwan. There is no question that Taiwan is a part of China according to them. And because of which they started something called cross-strait military exercises, which means they start firing missiles very close to Taiwan shores, start firing missiles over Taiwan, but not actually exactly attacking anybody on Taiwan, not attacking any base or anything like that. So that was the last Taiwan state crisis up until the current one, right? And after which the US and Taiwan had this policy called strategic ambiguity, where they do not recognize independence of Taiwan, but they have promised to aid the Taiwanese military if the People's Republic invades. But so it's a very complicated balance. It's a very fine balance that the US has maintained. So far, it was fine. But what happened, and this is fairly recently in 2016, a woman who's the current president called Tsai Ing-wen was elected as the president of Taiwan. Now she is a person who advocates for full independence of Taiwan from China, making it a separate country. Now other Taiwanese leaders, even today, do not want that to happen. But the reason she became so popular is because she advocates for full independence. And this is around the time when Xi Jinping is now possibly going to be declared president for life. Because in 2018, the party conference in Beijing, they removed the term limits that were put in after Mao Zedong's death, and basically giving Xi Jinping the chance to be president for life. And now he is he's a complete authoritarian, even by Chinese standards, and the Taiwanese do not want to be part of it. So the relations have soured ever since she became president. I mean, she hasn't signed when became president. And now, as you saw, the visit by Pelosi, which in my view was absolutely uncalled for. There was no need for that visit, but it happened, and the fallout of which will be pretty serious. If not now, at least a few years from now, it will be very, very serious.
Okay. So I think this sums up very well, to start off from the entire inception of PRC to PRC and ROC to, talking about the Sino Soviet split and how US has not only, defined this, but also changed sides multiple times as per its interests. And I believe that has also been the need of the time as of now, because see, I think this issue has become much important because US expects support from India also when something like this is unfolding right its neighborhood. We have seen joint multiple Navy drills, and as it has been said, even Air Force drills are going to be conducted near the island of Taiwan. So in such a situation, I think this historical context and to know about why this has started in the first place was immensely important, at least in this first part of our series. So thank you very much, Surya, for the historical context in the first part of this series. Maybe we'll take it up the second part of this series in a much current context. What is happening? How will the global power be changing? And what are the larger implications, especially in the context of what just happened in Russia, Ukraine. So thank you very much, Surya, for this, and see you soon in the next part.
Thank you, Sandesh. Thank you.